There's a sound the earth makes right before something changes. Most people never hear it. Mara Voss heard it every morning. She'd step onto the porch of her cabin, boots untied, coffee going cold in her hand, and she'd press one bare foot against the wooden boards and just listen. Not to the forest, not to the wind, to whatever was underneath all of that. The low, patient hum that had no name in any language she'd ever spoken. Her daughter used to call her strange for it. Her husband, Daniel, used to call her beautiful. Daniel had been gone 6 years now, buried on the ridge behind the cabin, under a white pine he'd planted the year they moved to the Kessler Range. Mara still talked to him sometimes. Still left a mug of coffee on the porch railing when the morning felt too big to carry alone. But that's not what this story is about. This story is about the sunflowers, and the night they came down from the sky. The Kessler Range sits in what used to be northern Montana, or what people called northern Montana before the Accord of 2040. One redrew everything and gave the land back to the agreements that should have held it all along. Now it was officially the Kessler Unincorporated Zone, which meant no city authority, no grid power, no mandatory compliance with the galactic transit protocols that had changed the rest of the world so completely in the 6 years since first contact. Mara had chosen that on purpose. She'd watched the cities transform, the towers growing silver integration nodes on their rooftops, the sky lanes filling with alien transit vectors every morning like schools of fish moving through water. She'd watched her neighbors in Billings stare up with open mouths, some of them crying from joy, some of them from something that hadn't found its name yet. She'd packed the truck and driven north. Daniel was already gone by then. The cancer had moved fast, faster than either of them had planned for. And when the aliens arrived, the Vane, as the news kept calling them, tall and angular and so profoundly uninterested in human politics that their diplomats had to be trained to make eye contact. Mara had been sitting in a hospital waiting room in Billings, holding a paper cup of terrible coffee, watching the first official transmission play on a screen bolted to the wall. She hadn't cried at the aliens. She'd been saving her tears for something else. The cabin had belonged to Daniel's grandmother. 3 rooms, a root cellar, a wood stove that heated the whole place if you fed it right, and a porch that faced east so you got the sunrise in your eyes every morning whether you wanted it or not. Mara had wanted it. She stripped the place down and rebuilt it slowly, the way grief moves when you let it not all at once but room by room. She rechinked the logs. She rebuilt the root cellar door. She got good at things she'd never had to be good at before. Splitting wood, reading weather, setting snares, understanding which silences in the forest meant safety and which ones meant something else. And in the spring of her first year there, she planted sunflowers. Not because she'd planned it, not because she had some grand idea. She'd found a paper bag of seeds in the back of a kitchen drawer, Daniel's handwriting on the label, his careful block letters, mammoth sunflower, heirloom, planted together. She didn't know when he'd written that. She didn't know what together had meant to him, together with her, together with the cabin, together with whatever future he'd been imagining. She stood at the kitchen counter for a long time holding that bag. Then she put on her boots and went outside and planted every single seed in a ring around the cabin. All of them, every last one. The sunflowers came up tall. That first summer they were spectacular, heads the size of dinner plates, faces tracking the sun from east to west the way loyal things do. The stalks grew taller than Mara expected. Some of them cleared 6 feet, then 7, pressing against the eaves of the porch roof when the wind leaned them. The deer ignored them. The rabbits left them alone. Even the crows, who stole everything, mostly stayed back. Mara watched them every day. She let them go to seed in the fall. She harvested half the seeds for next spring, left half for the birds, and did the whole thing again the next year. Then the year after. The ring of sunflowers became something permanent, taller each season as she selected for height, denser as the root systems filled in and the soil around the cabin changed. By the third year, neighbors, what few there were in the zone, started calling it the Sunflower House. By the fifth year, the ring had grown into something closer to a wall. The plants didn't just grow in the narrow beds she'd originally dug. They'd spread, self-seeded into the gaps, grown in overlapping columns 8 and 9 feet tall in summer, the heads so thick and closed that from the east ridge you couldn't see the cabin at all. Just a solid ring of yellow faces. Mara's daughter, Petra, drove up that summer and stood at the edge of it. "Mom," she said, "it's like a fortress." "It's just sunflowers," Mara said. Petra looked at her mother for a long moment with the particular expression adult children use when they've decided not to push. "Dad would have loved it," she finally said. Mara handed her a coffee. "I know." Year 6 was when everything changed. Not the sunflowers, they came up the same as always, reliable as memory, taller if anything, the root cellar now laced with their root systems in ways Mara didn't fully understand. She'd stopped trying to trim them back. Whatever they needed to do, they were doing it. The change came from the sky. It was August. The kind of August the Kessler Range does when it's feeling generous, warm days, cold nights, the forest holding that particular stillness that means the worst of summer is done and something easier is coming. Mara was on the porch, bootlaces still undone, coffee already half drunk. She heard it before she saw it. That hum. Not the low earth hum she'd been listening for all these years. Something higher. Something mechanical, but not the way human machines are mechanical. This had a quality to it, a texture, like sound made of several layers that didn't quite agree with each other. She set the coffee down. The sky above the eastern ridge was doing something wrong. She'd seen vane transit vectors before. Everybody had. They were hard to miss, long, dark shapes that moved without any of the visual logic human aircraft obeyed. No contrails, no heat shimmer, just displacement, like the air itself stepped aside. They usually stayed at altitude. They had designated transit corridors and they used them. The Accord of 2041 had been very specific about that. What was coming down toward the Kessler Range was not following any corridor Mara had ever heard of. And it wasn't alone. There were 3 of them. 2 large shapes, military, she clocked immediately, something in the profile, the purposefulness of the trajectory, and one smaller. The smaller one was in front, moving faster, trailing something from its undercarriage that caught the early morning light wrong, like it was leaking something the sun didn't know how to color. She was inside in 4 steps. Radio, shortwave, battery-powered because she'd never hooked into the grid. She turned it on and heard nothing but emergency band static on every frequency she knew, which meant whatever was happening right now, and the networks hadn't caught up yet. She went to the wall by the door. The rifle there was an old .308 bolt action, Daniels, kept clean and loaded because bears were real and the world after the Accord had more real things in it than bears. She took it. Then she went back to the porch because she needed to see. The smaller vessel came down in the east field, half a mile from the cabin. The other 2 were still descending, slower now, circling. Mara watched. The crash, it wasn't quite a crash, more a controlled emergency landing. The kind that leaves a scar on the ground but doesn't explode, left a long gouge across the east meadow, through the tree line, stopping about 400 meters from the edge of her sunflower ring. Steam or gas, she couldn't tell which, was venting from the underside of the thing in short rhythmic pulses. The 2 larger vessels continued circling. She could see now what they were. Vane military configuration. She'd seen the schematics in one of those news specials Petra kept sending her links to. Long-haul pursuit craft. Fast. Armed with something the military briefings carefully never described in specific terms. They were circling the downed vessel. And they were not, she noticed, descending to help it. That meant it wasn't one of theirs. She looked at the downed ship again. The shape was different, not the angular geometry the Vane used, the sharp, deliberate angles of a species that had learned to move through space with efficiency as the only aesthetic. This was something else, rounder in places, asymmetrical in a way that felt almost biological. She stood on the porch for another 30 seconds. Then she made the decision that would define the next 12 hours. She walked toward the ship. She moved through the sunflower ring at the east side, pushing between stalks taller than she was. The heads were full-faced and heavy now, late summer, and they pressed against her shoulders as she went through. She'd moved through this passage 100 times. She knew the gaps. The meadow on the other side was long and sloped down toward the tree line. The gouge in the earth from the landing was fresh, black soil turned up, grass burned in a stripe. The smell reached her before she got close. Not smoke exactly. More like ozone or the air before a lightning strike, and underneath that something sweeter, almost organic. The vessel was maybe 15 meters long, roughly oval from above, she guessed. From the side it looked like something between a seed pod and a hand tool. The surface was dark but not uniformly. Different sections caught light differently, some matte, some reflective, some seeming to shift between the two as she moved around. She was about 20 meters out when the hatch opened. She stopped, raised the rifle. Not with panic, she wasn't panicking. She'd made a choice to come here and she was going to carry it through honestly. The hatch dropped and something fell out of it. A person. She almost said the word out loud. Person. Because that was the category her brain assigned to it in the first second before the details filled in. 2 limbs for standing, 2 for holding. Upright. Bilateral. Moving, barely. In a way that she recognized as someone trying to get up after something very bad had just happened to their body. It was not a person, the way Mara was a person. But it was not a person either. She'd read the general biology reports that had been released under the Accord's transparency provisions. The Vane were one species. Everyone knew the Vane. Tall, gray-pale faces that humans kept describing as calm, in the way you describe a locked door as calm. But the Accord's appendices, the ones the major news outlets didn't cover much, mentioned others. Species the Vane had encountered before they found Earth. Species in various states of relationship with the Vane, which was a diplomatic way, Mara had always thought, of describing a range that probably ran from alliance to subjugation. The being on the ground in front of her was not Vane. It was smaller, broader through the shoulders. She could see that even through the suit it was wearing, something dark and close-fitting with panels along the arms and a collar that rose to cover the lower half of a face. The exposed upper face had 2 eyes. She noted this carefully, 2 eyes, forward-facing, which meant predator evolution, which meant a species that had come from something that had hunted. The eyes were amber. The skin around them was a dark copper brown, almost iridescent in the morning light. It was looking at her. She was looking at it. The 2 Vane pursuit craft were still circling above. "Are you hurt?" Mara asked. She knew it probably couldn't understand her, but she'd spent 6 years talking to a grave on a ridge, so the impulse to speak into uncertain silences was well established. The being blinked, once slowly. Its mouth moved. She could see the movement at the bottom of the collar, but no sound came out that she could parse as language. Then it did something she hadn't expected. It looked up at the circling ships. Then it looked back at her. Then it very deliberately held out one hand, palm up, an open palm, the same gesture she'd have made if she were trying to show someone she wasn't holding anything dangerous. She lowered the rifle. Not all the way, but enough. "Okay," she said. "Okay, come on then." She never fully understood later why she made that call so fast. Petra said it was grief, that spending 6 years alone had eroded the normal human instinct for caution. Maybe, but it didn't feel that way from the inside. From the inside, it felt like something simpler. The being was hurt, it was being hunted, and Mara had a house. That was the whole equation. Getting it moving was the first challenge. It was upright but not steady. One of its legs was taking weight wrong, something wrong at the joint or below it. She came closer, close enough to see the panel on its left arm was cracked and leaking something pale green that wasn't blood, or wasn't only blood, some integration of biology and technology that she didn't have a framework for. Its breathing was audible, labored but rhythmic. She got under its right arm and felt it flinch at the contact. "I know," she said. "I know, move." It moved. They crossed the meadow together in the kind of silence that happens when two things with nothing in common are focused entirely on one shared problem. The sunflower ring ahead was lit by the rising sun. The great heads turned east, and for a moment she'd think about this later, lying awake. The ring of flowers looked like a crowd of people watching them come. She pushed the first stalks aside and felt it hesitate. "It's fine," she said. "They're just plants." It passed through. Inside the cabin she put it in the chair by the wood stove, not because the stove was lit, August was too warm for that, but because the chair was solid and low and the right height. It sat. It took weight off the bad leg with what she recognized as relief, even across whatever distance separated their physiologies. She pulled up a second chair and sat across from it. They looked at each other. Up close in the light coming through the east windows, she could see more detail. The amber eyes were calm, not the vain kind of calm, not locked-door calm, but something more like the calm of someone who is very frightened and is working very hard not to show it. There were faint markings on the skin around the eyes, geometric, regular, which she guessed were either cultural or biological. She didn't know enough to tell. The collar of the suit was damaged. She could see that. One of the panels along its left arm had a crack that ran most of the length, and the pale green leakage had slowed but not stopped. "That needs to be looked at," she said. She got the first aid kit from under the sink. She was not a medic. She'd had wilderness first aid training, Daniel had insisted, living this far out, but that was designed for human bodies, and she was looking at something that was not a human body. She set the kit on the table and opened it and just left it there, visible, and let the being look at it. It looked for a long time. Then it reached out with the undamaged arm and touched the edge of one of the bandage packets, pressed it gently, turned it over. Then, moving carefully, it used 2 fingers to do something to the collar of its suit. A release, she guessed, some fastening system, and peeled the collar down enough to show the lower face. She'd been ready for almost anything and got something she hadn't quite anticipated. A face that was more human-adjacent than she expected. A mouth wider than human-proportioned, the same copper skin, the same iridescent quality in certain light. No nose in the human sense, but nostrils set lower and wider. The jaw was strong. The cheekbones dramatic. It was, in whatever framework she was trying not to use, a striking face. It looked at the first aid kit again. Then at her hands. Then it held out the damaged arm. She took it. The crack in the arm panel, she learned by careful touch, corresponded to an actual wound beneath. The suit's material had some kind of protective function she didn't fully understand, but where it was broken, the skin underneath had been cut. The pale green in the leakage was from the suit itself, some fluid in the lining. The actual wound bled dark, almost purple-red, and it was deep. She cleaned it as carefully as she knew how to. The being made no sound, not one. She pressed harder than she wanted to once, getting out a fragment of something sharp that had driven in with whatever impact had broken the arm panel, and the hand she was holding clenched hard. She felt the strength in it, much more than she'd expected, but still no sound. "You're tough," she said. She bandaged it with what she had. It wasn't the right material for whatever the biology was doing, she knew that, but it was better than nothing and better than the open air. When she finished, it did something with the collar of its suit again. not putting it back up, but a different gesture at the collarbone where she now saw a small raised section. It pressed it 3 times in a specific pattern. A sound came out, not from its mouth, from the suit. She almost knocked her chair over backwards before she understood it was a speaker. The sound resolved into something almost like language, her language, the words slightly mechanical, slightly delayed, like a human talking just after waking up. Gratitude, it said, for the wound care. She stared at the suit speaker. You have a translator, she said. Partial, basic functions remain. What's your name? A pause, then something that sounded like 3 syllables she couldn't quite hold, cavernal, maybe, or cavernal, and then, Cav, this is adequate for your speaking. Cav, she said, I'm Mara. Mara, the translator did something with the word that made it sound slightly formal. The ships above, they are tracking the vessel. They will find this location. How long do we have? Uncertain. The vessel's emergency masking systems were active during descent. They may have lost precise coordinates, but the meadow landing, a pause where she heard him breathing, the meadow will be visible. She'd already been thinking about this. They saw me in the meadow too, she said. Yes. Will that be a problem? The amber eyes looked at her for a long moment. The Vane Garrison Command has standing protocols regarding inhabited structures in unincorporated zones. They are prohibited from engaging civilian dwellings with active presence. So as long as I'm in my own home, they are prohibited from engaging directly. However, the prohibition has thresholds. Structural damage attributed to landing incident. Atmospheric discharge designated as incidental. There are, another pause, ways the language permits what the language forbids. She understood that. She'd lived in the human world long enough to understand that completely. Why are they chasing you? She asked. The amber eyes went to the window. The sound of the circling ships had changed pitch, lower now, which she thought probably meant lower altitude. That, Cav said, is a long answer. Give me the short one. I carry something they want destroyed, he said. Something that, if it reaches the right people, ends the Vane Garrison's legal basis for operating in this sector. 14 inhabited systems, 612 billion lives across 12 species. Mara looked at him. And the right people are on Earth. The right people are in the UN Accord Oversight Body, which meets in 17 days. He looked at the bandaged arm. I was attempting to reach Geneva. She looked at the ceiling, through which the sound of the circling ships pressed like a headache. You came in a little short, she said. Yes. The ships did a grid search of the east meadow. She watched through the east window, staying back from the glass. They moved slowly, methodically, the way you move when you're looking for something you know is close but can't pinpoint. The sunflower ring was at its fullest, August peak. The head stood at nearly 10 feet in the tallest sections, packed in so densely that from the meadow looking west, there was no gap, no sight line to the cabin. She knew because she'd checked, that first summer, curious about how the planting had transformed the view. The ships swept the meadow. They swept the tree line. They came toward the sunflower ring and then. They moved along it, not through it, not over it to look down. She frowned, watched, tried to understand. Cav, she said quietly, why aren't they scanning through the sunflowers? A pause. She heard him moving in the chair, adjusting. Helianthus annus, he said. The translator's pronunciation was precise, almost formal. The specific density of the seed head structures at this growth stage, and the root mass, the mycorrhizal interactions at this scale. It creates a dispersal pattern for certain scanning frequencies. Another pause. The Vane use thermal differential and bioelectric pulse scanning in atmosphere. The electrical signature of this plant colony is interfering with their equipment. Masking, yes. he sounded even through the translator, slightly surprised. An unusual planting configuration. It was my husband's seeds, Mara said. She didn't explain further. They stayed inside all day. She fed him, that was its own challenge. She had no idea what his biology could process, and she wasn't going to risk poisoning him with a potato, so she set out small amounts of different things on the table and let him sort through them, watching his face for anything that looked wrong. He eventually settled on hard cheese and some dried apple rings she'd put up the previous fall, which he ate very slowly and with what she could only describe as careful dignity. She made coffee. He smelled it and did nothing with it, which she took as a no. She made tea from dried nettles she'd collected in spring. He smelled it, and something around his eyes changed. May I? She poured him a mug. He held it in both hands, the left hand awkward around the bandaging, and didn't drink it, just held the warmth. She understood that completely. Outside, the ship swept back and forth. By midday they were ranging further out, she could tell by the sound, the pitch falling off as they moved toward the far ridges. Maybe they thought the vessel had come down further east. Maybe the emergency masking had confused the coordinates enough to give her a window. She asked Cav about what he was carrying, not out of nosiness, out of practicality. She needed to understand what the stakes were to make good decisions. He thought about it for a long time. Then he pressed the collar panel again, and the suit produced a sound that wasn't her language, a short instruction to something, she guessed. His right hand opened, and in the palm a small object materialized, extruded from the suit itself. Maybe the size of a hen's egg, dark, matte, perfectly smooth except for one edge that caught light in a way she couldn't categorize. "This is a record," he said. "Documentation of the true classification of 14 inhabited systems under the Vane expansion protocols. The garrison operates in each system under a legal instrument called the Provisional Security Charter, which requires that the inhabited populations be classified as a word that doesn't translate directly, essentially, pre-relational, not yet in formal agreement. Meaning the Vane don't have to ask permission. Correct, meaning they can establish military presence, extract resources, regulate transit without consent. And the record shows that the classifications are false, that each of the 12 species in question has met every criterion the Vane's own legal system establishes for full relational status. The garrison has known this for 40 years and has continued to falsify the records to maintain their operational authority." He held the egg-shaped object for a moment, then closed his hand over it. "I am from one of those 14 systems, the third one they came to. I have been building this record for 19 years. Mara sat with that for a while. 19 years. She thought about Daniel's bag of seeds with his careful handwriting, planted together. Things you carry for a long time because they matter. "What happens to you," she said, "if the garrison catches up with you before Geneva?" His amber eyes were steady. "The documentation ends," he said. "The 14 systems remain classified, the garrison remains, and he paused, "I cease." She nodded. "Okay," she said. She got up and started thinking. The problem was simple and very hard. He needed to reach Geneva in 17 days. His ship was compromised. She'd watched through the east window as one of the Vane pursuit craft spent 2 hours in the meadow doing something to it that she suspected was making it non-functional. His long-range communication was down. The garrison would be monitoring all standard channels in the region. She had a truck, a shortwave radio, 6 years of living off the grid, and a ring of sunflowers that was apparently confusing alien surveillance equipment. She also had Petra. "I need you to not ask a lot of questions right now," Mara said into the satellite phone. "Mom." Petra's voice was its usual blend of love and the particular exhaustion of being someone's child. There are 2 alien military ships circling the Kessler range right now. I'm watching it on 3 different live feeds, and you're calling me to tell me not to ask questions. Not a lot of questions, a few is fine. A pause. Are you safe? Right now, yes. Do you need me to call someone? That's what I'm working on. I need you to get me a contact at the UN Accord Oversight Office, not through normal channels, through your friend, the one who works in the Secondary Treaty Bureau. What's his name? Diallo. Diallo, can you reach him tonight? It's 3 in the morning, Mom. Can you reach him? A longer pause. What do I tell him? Tell him someone is trying to get to Geneva with evidence that changes everything for a lot of people, and they need a secure extraction window, and they need the garrison patrols moved off the Kessler Zone airspace, and they need it in the next 48 hours. The silence on the line was the particular silence of a daughter realizing her mother has become something she doesn't entirely recognize. Mom, Petra said, what happened up there? I planted a lot of sunflowers, Mara said, and they finally came in useful, called Diallo. She hung up. The second night was harder. The garrison patrol changed tactics around midnight. Instead of the methodical grid sweeping, they went to a hovering hold pattern, 1 ship high and stationary, 1 ship lower and ranging in tighter circles. More patient. They'd either gotten better data on the landing zone or they were simply committing to the long game. Mara kept the cabin dark. No lights, no electronics except the satellite phone on standby. She and Cav sat in the main room in the dark, and she found she didn't mind it. 6 years of early nights had made the dark comfortable. He asked her questions, through the translator, patient and deliberate. How long had she lived here? What the yellow plants were, whether she'd known they had the electromagnetic properties he described. No, she said. I just planted them because of the seeds. Your mate's seeds. She almost smiled. Husband, yes. He is no longer present. He died 6 years ago. I am, a pause where she heard the translator working. I am sorry for this absence. Thank you, she said, and meant it more than she'd expected to, hearing it from a voice not human in the dark with ships overhead. He told her about his home system in return. She didn't know the name for it in any human language. The translator produced a sound that was more music than word, but he described it. 3 inhabited moons around a gas giant, a civilization that had been building for 12,000 years when the garrison arrived, that had art and agriculture, and a relationship with their moon's ecosystems that had taken millennia to develop. And then the garrison came, she said. And then the garrison came, he agreed. And they looked at everything we had built and they called it provisional, preliminary, pre-relational. The anger in his voice was clear even through the translator's approximations. And you've spent 19 years building the case. My mother started it, he said, before me. And her teacher before her. 3 generations. Mara thought about that for a long time. You'll get to Geneva, she said. You sound certain. I am. Why? She thought about it. Because some things are just too important not to happen, she said. It sounded simple when she said it. She meant it simply. Some things accumulate enough weight, enough patience, enough years, they don't not happen. They can't. He was quiet for a moment. Your mate, he said, was he a person who thought this way? He was, she said. He thought everything worked out in the end. I used to tell him that was naive. And now? She listened to the ships above. And now I'm sitting in the dark helping an alien courier get his 19 years of evidence to Geneva, she said, because a bag of seeds in a drawer turned my garden into a military dead zone, so. She felt more than saw the shift in the dark that meant he was looking at her. Now I think he might have been right, she said. Petra called at 4:17 a.m. Diallo says yes. He says he can't speak officially, but he says yes. He needs 24 hours to arrange the airspace request through the Civilian Oversight Clause. Apparently, there's a protocol for exactly this kind of situation, which tells you everything about how routine this kind of situation has become. Can he do it without tipping the garrison? He says the airspace request goes through the Accord Joint Commission, not Garrison Command. They're parallel authorities. The garrison can't block it without formally challenging the commission, which would require them to justify why they're operating in a civilian unincorporated zone in the first place, which they can't do without explaining what they're looking for. Right, Diallo said. Petra's voice got careful. He said if whoever this person is actually has what you described, the commission is going to want them in Geneva in person, in front of the full oversight body. He said the garrison will know what it means when the airspace request goes through. He said there might be, he used the word interference. Of the legal kind or the other kind? A pause. He said probably both. Mara looked at the east window. Dawn was maybe 2 hours out. Tell him to file the request, she said. The next 22 hours were the longest she'd spent since the hospital waiting room in Billings. She and Cav stayed inside. She cooked, a real cook. Daniel always said so. And she fed them both carefully, learning more about what his system could handle, finding out that he could eat most of what she grew or preserved with surprising compatibility, that the nettle tea seemed to genuinely help with something about his physiology, that he had a complex relationship with salt that she didn't entirely understand but respected. She changed his bandage twice. The wound was healing in ways that were faster than human biology would explain, some combination of his native physiology and whatever the suit was doing on the biological level. The patrol ships held their patterns. Once around noon, one of them came very close to the cabin. She heard it low and slow directly overhead, and she sat perfectly still in the center of the room and watched the walls, as if she could see through them. Kev sat across from her. Neither of them moved. The ship moved off. She let out a breath. "Your flowers," he said. "My flowers," she agreed. She asked him in the long afternoon about the 12 species, what they were like. He talked for almost 3 hours. She listened. She heard about the reef builders of the second system, who had grown their cities in the living mineral structures of an ocean moon, who sang to navigate, not metaphorically, actually sang, specific frequencies, and whose art was made entirely of light refracted through water. She heard about the plains people of the seventh system, nomadic, organized around a social structure that had no direct human equivalent, who had been reclassifying themselves as a stellar civilization for 800 years and were simply ignored. She heard about the archive keepers of the 11th system, who had maintained an unbroken record of their own history for 60,000 years, a civilization so ancient that humanity was a footnote at the very end of their most recent volume. All of them pre-relational, provisional, subject to the charter. She thought about what that meant, what it meant to look at 60,000 years of human equivalent civilization and decide it didn't count. The garrison, she said at one point, how big are they as a force? Small, Cav said. Fewer than you'd think. The power comes from the legal instrument. Remove the charter, remove the legal basis, and the garrison has no standing in any of the 14 systems. They go home. They don't fight. They have no mandate to fight without the instrument. So the record really does end it. If the commission accepts it, if it is presented to the full oversight body, if the process is followed correctly. He was quiet for a moment. Many ifs. Yeah, Mara said. Most things worth doing have a lot of those. At 11 p.m. the satellite phone rang. The airspace request went through, Petra said. Her voice was tight. The commission filed it 12 minutes ago. The garrison has been notified. How did they react? Diallo says they're running emergency, legal consultations. They know what the airspace opening means. If someone is being extracted through official commission channels with oversight protection, they can't touch the extraction without triggering a full commission inquiry. So they'll pull back. Diallo thinks so. But Mom, a pause. He says they have maybe a 6-hour window before Garrison Legal finds a way to challenge the filing. Once the challenge goes in, the airspace closes until the legal question is resolved, and that could take months. When does the commission extraction vehicle arrive? 4 a.m. It'll be, she heard Petra doing something, papers or a screen. It'll be a civilian transit designation with commission insignia. A shuttle. Lands, collects, gone in under 10 minutes. Mara looked at her watch. 11:08 p.m. 5 hours. Okay, she said. Okay, we can do that. She heard Petra breathing. Mom, she said, are you really okay? Honestly. Please. Mara looked across the room. Cav was at the window, standing carefully on the bad leg, watching the dark outside. I'm better than I've been in a while, she said. Don't tell your therapist friend I said that. They sat together through the last hours in a way that had stopped needing words. She made more tea. He held it again, both hands, the warmth. Around 1 a.m. the patrol ships changed again. The high stationary one moved not toward them, away, toward the northeast ridge. She thought she understood that. The garrison was repositioning, testing the edges of the commission filing, looking for what was legally permissible. They won't come in, Cav said. Not directly. No, but they're not happy. No. You've been doing this a long time, she said. Not just the 19 years, all of it. Since your mother, since her teacher. Does the long time make it heavier or lighter? He considered this for longer than she expected. Both, he said finally. The weight is real, but each year of the weight proves that the weight mattered enough to carry. Does this make sense in your language? She thought about Daniel, about 6 years, about seeds in a drawer with careful handwriting. It makes perfect sense, she said. At 3:30 a.m. she helped him to the door. His leg had improved through the night again, faster than human biology would pace it, something she chose to find interesting rather than unsettling. He was walking with weight on it now, carefully, but walking. They stood at the door looking out at the sunflower ring in the pre-dawn dark. The heads had all turned east now, facing the coming light that wasn't there yet, the way they always did. 10 feet tall in some places, thick and absolute, a living wall around a small cabin on a ridge in the Kessler unincorporated zone. They saved you, she said, the sunflowers. They saved the record, he said, which saves much else. I know, but I meant you specifically. He looked at her. In the dark she could see the amber of his eyes more clearly than she expected, some bioluminescence she hadn't noticed in the daylight. Yes, he said, me specifically. She extended her hand. He looked at it. Then with the unbandaged right hand he took it. The grip was firm and warm and went on for a moment longer than a strictly transactional farewell required. Your mate's seeds, he said. He chose them well. He did, she said. He chose most things well. The commission shuttle came in at 4:02 a.m. It dropped into the East Meadow quiet and certain. No drama. These were professionals. People who did extractions through legal windows as a regular feature of the new world. Its lights were the blue-white of official documentation, commission designation clear on every surface. Mara watched from the porch. Cav crossed the meadow on his own, slow but deliberate. He didn't look back until he was at the shuttle door, and then he looked back at the cabin, at the ring of sunflowers beginning to show as shapes in the lightening dark, at the woman on the porch with untied boots and a cooling coffee. He raised one hand. She raised hers. The shuttle closed, lifted, gone. High in the dark above the Kessler range, she heard the 2 garrison ships hold their position for a long time. calculating, she supposed, consulting, finding the edges of what was legally available. They turned eventually. And they went.